Hello, my name's Adam Sandman, and welcome to the Inflectra webinar where we'll be discussing the software testing and compliance challenges in the healthcare industry, with a specific emphasis on the move to cloud computing. In today's webinar, we'll first of all be talking about some of the unique needs of the healthcare industry when it comes to testing and compliance. We'll then move on to some of the recent changes in the move to cloud computing, which present opportunities and challenges. We'll then provide an overview of the Inflectra platform, which helps you with your testing and compliance needs. We then have a practical demonstration of two live applications, SpiraTeam and Rapise, and we'll be demonstrating how the tools together can help you improve your testing and compliance needs, especially in the era of cloud computing. And after that, we have our Q&A. First of all, the challenges in the healthcare industry. So what are some of the top challenges? One of the things that we've heard from our customers is the increasing amount of and different types of government regulation, and it depends obviously in which countries you operate. One of the top things that's become very, very important is data privacy, and in the healthcare space, that's been true for a while with HIPAA, which has been around for many years. But also in Europe now, there's a move towards the General Protection on Data Regulation, which significantly improves the compliance requirements for privacy, requires people to make sure they know which data they have from people, that they get their consent, that they understand the life cycle of that data, when it's destroyed, retention issues, and also giving people the right to their data. So there's lots of regulations around data. And unfortunately, data is moving between lots of different systems and lots of different companies and processes, and it's difficult to always know, where it's come from, where it's going. And you need to make sure that you have a handle on all the data flows in your company and organization, and the testing you're doing doesn't inadvertently expose that data. So, for example, if you're using real patient data, for testing, that could be an issue because you're now moving patient data from a production system into a test system. However, you need to do realistic testing of that data. So having adequate data sanitization and obscuration processes in place so you can do testing and validation, but yet don't expose data to potentially systems that aren't covered by your privacy rules. Maybe you're moving data to a third-party company to do your testing. Maybe they're not covered by HIPAA. Maybe they're not covered by GDPR. Maybe they're moving that data across national boundaries and they're not a member of Privacy Shield. So that, for example, European patient data being used in a clinical trial is moved to the US inadvertently. You've got to be very careful around data privacy now. And we have a white paper on this on our website. Obviously, in terms of other regulations, things around the Affordable Care Act in America, states implementing different rules, there's lots and lots of regulations that you have to test against, or you can be found to be not compliant. And then, of course, just overall changes in Medicare, Medicaid, and other insurance, private insurance, programs requiring increasing amounts of testing and validation that you're meeting all of the needs of those programs. Maybe you're being assessed for value-based billing rather than simply number of services. Well, you have to track all that. You've got to measure all that. All the reports you have to provide is increasingly complicated. And for our customers in the industries making medical devices or pharma, they're dealing with FDA compliance, FDA testing, Part 11, lots of things that require a lot of paper trails. The second thing we're seeing in the industry from our customers is consolidation of healthcare providers. And that's a good thing in some ways because it can reduce costs for patients. However, it means you're now integrating lots of different back-end systems, different ERP systems, different pharmacy systems. And when you combine this with the next bullet point around just more complexity, more automated systems, patient information systems, billing systems, pharmacy, blood bank, the medical records that have to move potentially between different providers, the increasing complexity of the IT landscape for the healthcare, not to mention, of course, the vulnerability, therefore, for security and viruses and malware, means there's just a large amount of testing and validation challenges that are needed. And unfortunately, there's also at the same time a reduction in testing and validation budget. So you may have less people to do the testing. It's a cost center, not a profit center. So unfortunately, it's always going to be difficult to find the time and the people to do all the necessary testing. And when we talk to our customers who are using paper-based, Excel-based, Microsoft Word-based testing and validation systems, they just don't have the time now to manage all the information and to keep up with all of these different aspects. And as I mentioned already, the other thing is we've also got the move towards agile development, both from a development standpoint and a testing standpoint. If we are trying to be more agile so that we can actually keep up with latest technologies and be able to deliver features for a medical environment, potentially new patient information features, new billing features, the vendors are trying to deliver features faster, but we have to validate these systems, and that doesn't necessarily mean we can keep up with the pace of new features. So are there ways where we can try and be more agile, but yet still be compliant with all the paperwork we have to produce and all the validation we have to do? So the next piece then is the cloud. So the cloud takes a lot of those same challenges and makes it better, and yet makes it worse. So first of all, there are some advantages of the cloud, which is helping, I think, a lot of organizations that deal with a lot of infrastructure. The first thing is, if you move, for example, all of your ERP over to Microsoft Dynamics 365 in the cloud, you are, for example, offloading a lot of the infrastructure risk to experts, people whose job it is to maintain systems. So your security in theory is higher, the ability to scale as you add more patients, you add more hospitals to your network, as you add more people using the systems and potentially vendors and third parties, it's easier to be able to scale that because you have people who know what they're doing managing it rather than an in-house IT department, which is again a cost center and often therefore not fully staffed or fully resourced. The obviously outsourcing does give some degree of the change control to the infrastructure. So you don't have to necessarily have all the processes and policies for some of the change control management yourself. You can let Microsoft or Amazon or Oracle or other companies that are managing this, or SAP that are managing it for you, use their best practices for change control and release and patch management. They take away a lot of that risk that you would normally have to manage yourself. They can ensure you're compliant with different versions of the software, that the latest security patches are in place, that testing and vulnerability is being done correctly, and that will increase your reliability and availability. Reliability in that these people, they know how to manage the infrastructure really well. That's their business. They have very high uptime compared to an on-premise installation usually. And also availability. Because they're cloud hosted, you can now make these same systems available to people on the road. For example, you may have people going out into the field who need connectivity to these systems. Previously, that would be very difficult. With the cloud, it's much easier to give availability to remote centers, people working freelance, people working on the road. It's very easy to have a much more available set of systems. And as I mentioned earlier on, potentially higher security. Security could be higher because you have the cloud provider taking care of the infrastructure piece. You still have to deal with the application piece, which we'll talk about next. But the infrastructure provider is taking a large part of the security off the plate. They know how to manage the firewalls, they know how to manage all the servers, the operating system patches, a lot of the core systems that tend to have vulnerabilities, they're taking that from you, and they're doing this for a large number of customers, and so they typically will be on newer versions, be closer to the right number of patches, and will usually be, I think, more reliable from a security standpoint and a lower attack surface. Part of that's because they typically will have best practices baked in. Your IT department doesn't have to learn the best way to manage a certain web server or a certain database platform or a certain application. The person hosting it, that's what they do. They host that application. They know the best practices. So you're benefiting from the scale and the fact that they do this for many customers, and so there's huge savings potentially built into that because they know what they're doing, at least in theory. But there are unfortunately some challenges. So one of the challenges we found talking to some of our customers, particularly in environments that are regulated, is that the cloud platform may update more frequently than they are used to and that they're able to validate. So if a customer is going to do a lot of testing and compliance validation on a system, and it's, let's say, on Microsoft Azure, and Azure is updating once a month with a new patch, a new version. So that could be changing things like Office 365, Dynamics 365, it could be SAP updates, it could be Oracle Financials, it could be a billing platform, it could be a CRM platform, any of the different core apps that you're using, they're typically updating monthly. Sometimes you can have a delayed schedule where it's quarterly, so it's important when you're working with your cloud provider to make sure that the update schedule that they're going to use will match with your testing, compliance, and validation plan. But for sure, it's going to be much more frequent than you're used to with your on-premise environment, and so if you're doing paper-based validation, and when I say paper, it could be Excel, it could be Word, any of those different technologies, that's going to be very difficult to keep up with. It's going to be very hard to keep doing this on a frequent basis. The other thing that's unfortunately complicated is that in theory, if the cloud platform is managing the change control of the infrastructure, can you outsource it and say, they do all the change control management, they are compliant with, say, GDPR or HIPAA, we don't have to do anything. We can just use the system and be on our way. Well, unfortunately, the applications that run on those cloud platforms, even if they're managed by that cloud provider, you're still on the hook for the change control of it, because most of these platforms have lots of configuration options. And depending on the configuration options or the add-ons or the customizations you've done, those need to be managed by change control. They need to be tested and validated. And so you are responsible for testing those. And from a legal standpoint, most of the cloud providers, if you read the fine print, typically are not indemnifying you if there's, for example, a HIPAA breach, or if a European data protection regulator comes to you and discusses a breach. Who's on the hook for that? Is it solely the cloud provider? Not really. And in fact, if you look at the GDPR in Europe, they make this distinction between the data controller and data processor, which I think is very helpful. A data controller is someone who puts the information in. A data processor is someone who actually manages the data on behalf of the instructions. So what that would mean is, if you put some patient data into a database on a system, you're the data controller. You got that data from someone, you got their consent to put it in, they signed some form, they signed it, you put it in the system, you're aware it's in the system, you're managing that data, you're using it for various things. At some point, that data has to get purged or expunged when that patient is no longer in the system, or is no longer a client, or, for example, that the person has requested the data be expunged. Whatever the reason, you are the person who is responsible for that. The data processor, which will be your cloud platform, they're getting instructions from you. They should provide the tools for you to easily find the data, expunge it, obfuscate it, make sure it's secure. But ultimately, you're the data controller. And so in most cases, with the GDPR in Europe, and it's true for HIPAA, unfortunately, if you put the information in, you are really the ones who are legally responsible. So just because you have a cloud platform that is validated for a certain type of information, for example, HIPAA, GDPR, or FDA data, any of those cloud platforms does not insulate you from the need to actually do testing and validation, unfortunately. And so the key will be how to leverage some of the benefits of that cloud platform, the best practices, the infrastructure level security, the things that they can provide to reduce some of the workload on your organization, and figure out what are the things that you're still responsible for. Because the change control and the validation is a shared responsibility now. But ultimately, when it really comes down to it, you are responsible. Most of the legal fine print from most cloud platforms will make it clear that ultimately they are acting on the instructions from your organization. And if you put data in that shouldn't be in the system, or there's a data breach, you're responsible for notifying people. They will help you. Maybe down the road there will be some way to get some of the money back, or some of the issues could be addressed, but ultimately you are the one who's responsible. So that's some of the challenges about managing healthcare data and healthcare systems in general. That's also some of the specifics we're seeing about moving to the cloud that people are concerned about. Next thing we're going to talk about are some of the Inflectra solutions that we have to help make this easier. So first of all, just to give you a little bit of an overview of the product suite, this is our entire suite of applications that we provide, and the main one we'll be talking about today will be our SpiraTeam platform. That's our application lifecycle management platform, and that lets you manage your requirements, your tests. It has task and project management, so you can manage teams of people doing those activities, and it has great reporting and traceability analysis and tools to help you better test and validate and manage compliance of your applications. The second tool we're going to talk about, which is at the bottom, the Rapise tool, that's our automation tool. And what we have found is that customers that are doing a lot of testing and validation don't typically have time to be able to do it manually, have users click through all the applications, every screen, every use case, every business flow. There just isn't time, especially with cloud computing. It's just infeasible every month to run through everything manually. And so what you'll want to do is be able to split some of the work between what can be done in SpiraTeam manually and what can be done using Rapise in automation, and find that right balance is really important. So we'll be talking about both products. And just to give you a flavor of what we'll be showing in the live demo, the first thing we'll be talking about is requirements and test validation, how you write your requirements in the system, build out some tests that you can use to validate those, how you can manage the test coverage so that you can have a full set of test reports between your requirements and your test cases, so that you can actually do reporting to say, this is everything we need to test, this is how we tested it, this is how it was tested, it was signed off, we're good to go. Another really important feature I'll show you is audit logging, audit trail, and change management. Because if you change your requirements, your test may be invalid. And also, in terms of the changes, is there a workflow? How do you make sure that those particular test cases and requirements have been approved and are ready for use? Another really important thing will be security and permissions, because it's important to make sure that when someone who's in the system performs an action, they're correctly allowed and empowered. And again, most of the data privacy rules, the FDA CPR Part 11, certainly do require the user to have a very strong sense of which users are in the system, what can they perform at different steps, and it's really important to make sure you've aligned this with your business processes. And as I mentioned a few slides earlier, workflow is key as well. Having requirements, having test cases is great. Having audit history is really important. But you've also got to be able to make sure that before you even run a test case or run a requirement, you have to make sure that that has been approved already and ready for testing. And to do that, we provide some workflow capabilities that makes this easier. We also do include the ability to use electronic signatures, so you don't have to have everything signed on paper. And that we found a lot of customers have found is very helpful for improving the time from writing requirements, testing, logging the results, signing the results, and moving forward. And then we'll move into the automation piece, and there are two pieces to this. One is we're going to give you a brief demonstration of how you can do automated testing of a system and show you how that works, and the fact that we have a very easy to read scriptless framework so that people who are test analysts who may be familiar with the system being tested, for example, a pharmacy system or a billing system, they don't necessarily have to be experts in programming. They can use our automated testing tool to do test validation very easily. And then the other piece we have is the ability to generate manual test cases. So for an application where you don't need it to be fully automated, there's an option to actually generate the documentation from the application, so that will actually write the manual test case with screenshots for you. And we'll show you that as well. And then after that, we'll move into the Q&A. So with that, we're going to move into the live application. And the first thing we'll be doing is looking in SpiraTeam, which is right here. So what we've done so far ahead of time is created a sample project, healthcare project. You can see it right here. And initially it's empty. If you look at it, there's no requirements, no test cases, and we've done no configuration for it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of requirements. And just to keep things short for the demo, I'm only going to create a few requirements, so don't worry. So let's go in first of all and create some requirements. And we'll do it for a billing system. So, billing system features. So that's our top level requirement. And what we need to do now is create some features under that. So let's create a couple. So one of them might be we need to create the ability to enter a new billing profile. And when you enter requirements in, you can stretch the columns, make them a little bit wider, like that, which I like. And you notice as we start to enter things, this graph will start to get populated. And right now, any requirement we enter is marked as not covered. That, and then the graph here, that means there's no requirement validating it. So that's really important for us to know. The next thing we'll do is enter another requirement, which will be ability to edit and edit and adjust billing profile. And the next one, we'll just do another one, will be ability to approve billing profile. So we're going to create one, adjust it, approve it, and maybe we'll also have like one more, which was ability to generate an invoice. So we create a new billing account. We can edit it, adjust it, approve it, and then generate an invoice. And those are four features we might have in a billing system. And maybe we'll have one more feature that we're not going to release yet, so we'll put that in for future. So ability to report on overdue invoices, like that. So those are some requirements. Okay. So the other thing we will want to do then is decide, which version of these going to be in. So we go into our releases, and we'll at the very least want to create, let's say, 2 releases. We'll create an initial release. We'll call that release 1.0. That's our initial release. And we'll create a second one, which will be release 2.0. Like that. Okay. So we have those set up. So now what we want to do before we go any further is these are requirements and they're all marked as status requested. And this is where you'll typically want to make some configuration changes into SpiraTeam, specifically for a healthcare type project where we have some specific rules we want to set up. So by default, when you go into SpiraTeam, there's some automation that can occur, which is if you go into the planning options, it will automatically change the status of a requirement when you assign a release to it. Now in software projects that's pretty good because it simplifies having to manually change the statuses, but here we want to have explicit approvals. We don't want that happening, so I'm going to turn that off. That's an important thing to do, so we'll hit save. The other thing we want to do up front is in the workflow, we go to requirements workflows, we'll want to customize those slightly so that when we go into the workflow for a new requirement, let's go here, the new requirement comes in as requested, we want to force it to go into review and not have the ability to be accepted right away. So we'll get rid of that option. That forces everything to go through the review cycle. When we get to the review cycle and now it gets accepted, we want to make sure that people have to sign that change. We're accepting the requirement, so we're going to add on the signature for that. You can also at this point limit the roles that can make these changes. I'm just keeping the defaults for today's demo. But in reality, you'd want to go through this and audit the different users you have and make sure the roles are appropriate. So if we go back to that original slide I had about access control, it's really important to also go into the membership of the project that you're working on. These will be all the members who can access this project, and these are their roles right here. You'll want to go into the role definitions and make sure you understand what those roles mean. So when I see someone as a tester, you can see all the permissions they have on the project. And you may want to create your own roles that have different permissions. So if you have testers who've got different permissions and can do different actions, you may want to have several different types of tester role which can behave differently. And they can perhaps also approve or reject different requirements and test cases at different points in the workflow. For example, the person who approves the requirement might not allow to be the same person who approves the test case. So you might want to create two different tester roles with the same permissions here, but then when you go into that workflow, you could then assign different workflow options for them. So if you go into the workflow, just to go back one step, and you look at that accept requirement option, right now it's the project owner and manager who can do it. Maybe one type of tester could do it, another type can't. And similarly for test cases, I'm not going to set that up right now, but you can go into the test case workflows and you could do the same thing. You may have a test case in here, which for example would be a new test case coming in. It's a draft test case, review it, and we want to approve it. We can make that require an approval as well. So actually we'll go ahead and do that. We'll put a signature on there. So that needs to be approved also. Okay, so we've now got the workflow set up the way we want. If I go back to my requirements page, I'm going to take just one requirement for now. The ability to establish a new billing profile. And in the description, we do let you put in a lot more information than just the name. So this is really important. You'd want to fill out information about what you're going to do in this requirement, all the different aspects. If this was a paper-based requirement documentation, this would be the description of the requirement, and SpiraTeam has import tools for Excel and Word. So if you do have a lot of legacy documentation that you want to import, we can do bulk imports directly into SpiraTeam to do that. We would recommend writing a detailed definition. So for example, this is the feature that lets AR person create a new billing profile for a customer. They would enter in the personal information, insurance, plans, and other important billing information that you need. So this is our requirement. Hit save, and now let's say we're going to review this. So I'll move this to review, and I'll assign it to someone. I'm going to assign it to me, just so I'm going to log in, log out. In real life, you'd want to assign it to someone else and make sure that the workflow forces you to be assigned to someone other than yourself, so it's not the same person self-approving it. So I'll mark here, we need to review this. Okay, hit save. So now it's approved. That's excellent. Sorry, now it's reviewed. Now we want to approve it. You'll notice when I hit the accept requirement to approve it, there's a little padlock. That tells us that this is going to require a signature. So I hit accept, and I hit save. It also is going to warn me before I do that the priority is required. So let me fill in the priority as well. This is pretty important. I also want to put in the release that we're going to, actually I'll do that later. So we'll hit save, and because it needs electronic signature, I have to re-authenticate. That way it guarantees it's me. So I'm re-authenticating. It's also telling me what is the meaning of my change. I can edit this or take the one that's given to me, hit sign, and now it's saved. So now we have the review comment and the signing comment automatically added for us, and it's moved to the accepted. The last thing I want to do is plan this, so I'll sign a release and say this is going to be release 1. Hit save. This requirement is now done, and if you go back to a requirements page, you'll see it's got a priority, it's got a release, it's planned for that release, it's approved and ready to go. You'll see that the burn down chart has changed, so we can actually do some agile planning directly here as well, but we'll still have all the ability to do the approvals and the reporting on compliance and validation and test traceability as well, which is nice. So we've got our requirement, but it's not covered by any test cases. So if we ran a report and said, show me everything that's not covered, everything's going to show up. So that's bad. We want to have test coverage. We've got to validate this actual requirement. So if I click on it again, we have a nice shortcut in the tool. We can go in here and say test coverage. There isn't any. There aren't any test cases yet. So when we go to add them, we have an option to create a test case directly from the requirement. So I'll do that. If you already had a test case in existence, you could just link it directly by searching for its name or number right here. So now I have a test case, and I'm just going to open that in a separate tab. There's my test case. And I'm going to go in here and I'll create a new folder for my test case. We'll call it validation tests. And I'm going to drag this over to that folder. And I'm going to go rename it. So I'll click on it. I can do it inline or I can do it here. And we'll go tests the entering of a new billing profile. And we'll hit save. And that's it. This is a draft test case. Now, right now, the description has been inherited from the requirement. If we go back, we'll see it does link to that requirement. So that's good. Also notice the suspect flag. We're going to come back to that later, but that tells us that with that set to yes, that the requirement has changed. So once we approve this test case, if for any reason the requirement was to be changed, and you can prevent it being changed by having it become read-only, but if you do allow it to be changed in certain statuses, then if it does get changed, we will flag this test case as suspect. So you know there needs to be a retest because the test case no longer truly represents a test of that requirement, or at least potentially doesn't. So we're going to create some steps, and so I'll just create a couple, keep it quick for today's webinar. So the first thing would be click on the link to enter the billing module, the module homepage, billing homepage opens, and the second one would be enter the new customer's information, the system accepts it. And the last one would be click this submit button. The data is accepted and displayed correctly on the home page. Hit save. So we've now got some steps. So this is our test case. Now it's just a draft. So I need to go in and review that. So I'll review that and assign it to someone to review. I'm going to again assign it to me, just so I can go log in and log out, but in real life you'd assign it to someone else. That's good. And now we're going to approve that test case. So I mark it as approved. Again, the padlock means it's going to require a signature. So I approve it. Hit save. I put in my authentication. Hit sign. It's saved. And the comment is right here. One comment is created for you, so you can see this test case was created from the requirement, and the second automated comment is that once it's been moved through the electronic signature process, it puts a copy of the meaning in as a comment, so it's really easy to see. And if you go into the history tab, which is the audit trail, you'll see we do have this audit trail. And when you use electronic signature, we also do hash the data and store that with the record, so if someone tries to tamper with it, we'll know it's not accurate. Similarly, if you go back to the requirement and go to the associations tab, we would also have a change history here as well when I change the information. Sorry, wrong tab. That's the one I wanted, history tab. There you go. There you'll see all the changes made to that requirement. So both the requirement and the test case have an audit trail of all the changes. And if we go back to our requirements homepage, you're going to see we've gone from having no coverage to having a test case. The gray bar means it's not yet run, but there is a test case. And as a shortcut, if we wanted to test all the other things that are going to be in the, we could go in here, and there's an option to even go Tools, Create Test Cases, and that will bulk create empty test cases for all of the others, like that. And in real life, we now go through and approve all of these and get them all to the same point as this one. Now, one thing I should mention is if we do change this requirement, let's say we go in here, change the title, maybe change another field, say, hit save, get back to our test case, and hit refresh, the suspect flag has been thrown automatically. So we do get notified if the requirement is changed in some way, our test case is no longer valid. So I'm going to mark that back to no. I'm reviewing this, review the requirement. Yes, it's still a good test case. It still adequately tests it. Hit save again. So we now have verified that that change to the requirement did not impact our test case in a way that makes it invalid. In real life, you might need to write a second test case, adjust the test case, and then you can set the thing back to suspect to be false. The advantage of the suspect flag is you can do a search on it. So if you go back into test cases, you can do a filter by just going to show hide columns and show suspect flag. And that way you can do a quick search to find anything that's suspect. And there isn't anything. Okay, that's good. So the next thing we'll do is run a test case, and that will then cause the test case status to change and the requirements to change as well. So if I go in here and I just execute it, there's also the ability in SpiraTeam to use what are called test sets. That's where you can group test cases together. There's also the ability to do what are called test configurations, where you can create a set of different test data and run the same test case through multiple iterations of the same test. That's out of scope for today's webinar, but we do have other webinars on our YouTube channel which go into those particular features. So if you are interested, please go ahead and check those out. So right now we're just going to execute this one. Tools, execute. And we'll hit next. And we're going to go through and say we go to the first step, which is to create a billing profile. We go to the home page, it opens, hit pass, enter the new customer's information. Let's say that passes. Step 3, we hit the submit button and it didn't work correctly. And I don't have a billing application, but I have another application which we'll just take a screenshot of right here and pretend that's a failure. It's not really. We'll go in here and paste it in. So we'll received a system error. Or maybe the data was incorrect. Something happened that wasn't correct. Maybe the data wasn't stored correctly, or perhaps an error appeared. Whatever it is whatever makes sense. And then we'd hit fail. Now, before we hit fail, we can also log a defect at this point. So that way, if there's a defect that we need someone to either fix a bug in the system, if it's a packaged application like SAP, maybe there's a configuration change that has to be made. If it's a cloud-based application, maybe there's some setting in the cloud platform that needs to be adjusted. Whatever it is that needs to be done, you're assigning basically an incident, which for us is a way of tracking some activity that needs to happen before we can do a retest. So we'll just say there's a system error on billing page module. Billing page submission. That's a bug. You can customize these values as you wish. Hit fail. And we've now logged that step. The test has failed. I'll hit finish. And if we now go back into the test case list, we'll see we've got a nice little graph here that shows us the percentage of failed and not run. And if we go back into the requirements page, we'll see the same thing with the requirements. There's our one requirement that is got one test case that failed. These are the 3 that are not run. That's the one that's not yet got a test case. And the little graph here will show you the same thing. What percentage of my requirements have failed, not covered by test cases yet, or just not run. So that's really handy. And if you go to the home page of the project, you'll get the same information in a bar chart form. So that's very good. So that's how you would do the test case creation, the writing, the setup, and the running of the test case, and logging a defect. Now, one of the key things will be reporting, because one of the things that's really important is how do I generate reports that I can give to people who are auditing this. So, for example, I need to be able to generate a traceability matrix. do I have the ability to show that all my requirements have been tested and can be tested? So let's go ahead and do that first. So this is something where you can take the output of SpiraTeam and generate your documentation. So rather than having to have everything managed in Excel and Word, as you might do today, you can have everything be done electronically in SpiraTeam and then just generate the documentation that you need when it's needed. So let's take a traceability report. I'll choose PDF. And it's a very small project with only a few requirements, so I don't need to redo any filtering. I could filter the data down, so I could say, show me only the items that are in release 1. I probably want to only include requirements that are actually approved at this point. I don't want all of them. So you would filter them down to the ones you want. And then if that's a setting you're going to use repeatedly, then you could create a saved report. So if you're always going to generate a report of completed requirements that are in this release that have been approved already, for example, and the test cases have been approved, you could put that in here and make that a standard report. And for right now, I'm just going to create it immediately just to show you. And that's going to generate a traceability report in PDF format. Let's view that. There you go. That's a very simple traceability matrix. You can customize the format. Out of the box, it's going to show you the name of the project, all the requirements, the type and the status, the release it's part of, and then the traceability to the test cases. And then the reverse is true for the test cases back to your requirements. Now this is a very nice summary table. It doesn't include all the results. So this is definitely not a validation report where it gives you all the information of what was done. It's just a summary table of the traceability. So the other report you might want, which will give you more of that information, would be, for example, the requirements detail report. And if I choose that, let's say in MS Word, I can choose all the information. Again, I won't filter it because it's a small project. In real life, you probably would want to do that. And let's generate that document right now. And that's going to give you the more comprehensive view of all the activities. So this is an example of a report you might get out, where you have the name of the requirements, that was just the heading. Then you've got the first requirement, which is the ability to edit a new billing profile. It's got the various metadata, all the fields that we have. You can customize the report to hide the ones you don't want. Under that are the comments, including the changes we made. Then there's the test coverage. Then there's the defects that were logged, the change history, so the audit trail is right here. And then it moves on to the next one. So you have here traceability from requirements to the tests, the defects, change history, all in one report. And you can do the same thing at the test case level. You can get a test case detail report that shows you the test cases, the runs, the defects, back to the requirements. So there's various different reports in the system, and if you need information that we don't give you out of the box, it's really easy to write a custom report or a custom graph to do that as well. So that's an overview of SpiraTeam, which is our requirements management tool. It does test management, ties the validation together, includes defect tracking, does task management. It also does support agile projects. So if you are looking to be more agile yet still have all the compliance documentation that you need, you can use the Kanban boards, you can use the Scrum boards that are built into it. I'll just choose a project that's got more data to show you, like that. So you can have, for example, a backlog. You can look at different releases. You can see all the requirements. You can see the test cases that are included. So these are our test cases. These are our requirements. So you have a traceability view even in an agile project where you have a Scrum board or a Kanban board. So where you are looking to be more agile, but you still do need the rigor and discipline, you have the ability to do that within SpiraTeam. So the second part of our talk then is on the automation piece. So it's all very well to have a great management tool, which is going to be easier to manage than Excel and Word or paper. However, especially if you're in a cloud environment, it's going to be very difficult to do all the testing you need every month completely manually. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you want to automate every test case. We would say isolate that 20% of tests that take a lot of time that are really repetitive. So, for example, you've got a test that you have to log into all of your different systems. You have to log in with different users to make sure that the people who are logged in can only see certain tabs on the screen and that people can't see information that they're not supposed to see. You could then go in and write an automated test just for that. Someone's on and off mute. I'm just going to unmute them. Mute them, sorry. There you go. Okay. So we'll look at the automation piece next. So if we go into automation, we have an automation tool here called Rapise, which integrates with SpiraTeam. It can also be used completely separately as well. So if you are using another test management tool or requirements management tool, you can use Rapise with that. Similarly, if you already have an automation tool that works well with your applications, then you can use SpiraTeam with that automation tool. And different automation tools will work better with different applications. So if you have some specialized apps, they may come with their own automation tools, and that would make sense to use. So in today's demo, I'm going to be using Rapise together with SpiraTeam, and to do that, I just need to make sure it's set up correctly to point to the SpiraTeam that we're using, which is this is the server, and that is correct, so that's good. And what we're going to do is create a new test. So we'll go in here, create a new test, and the application we'll be testing today is this sample application that we have right here. It's called Library Information System. It's on our website, and it's just a very simple web-based system. You can log in, log out, and create something. It's not a billing system, but again, it gives you a flavor of how you can automate an application. So we're going to create a test. We'll choose the project. We'll use our healthcare validation project. We'll create a new test case called Automation Test 1. Hit OK. And we are testing web applications, so I need to select that. I'm using Firefox as my browser. Hit OK. And as I mentioned, there is two options in test automation. There are tools out in the market which will do script-based, where everything's done in code, and there's other tools that are visual-based, where it's all done in a visual format. We support both options, and I would recommend when you're choosing a tool, look at your users. If your users are programmers and they really like to get into the code, then they'll probably be more productive with a tool that can do script-based recording. If you're looking at users who are more functional experts, they may be more comfortable with a more table-based, non-scripting approach. If you've got a combination of users, then I would find a tool that can do both, that allows you to mix and match. So for today, what we'll do is go in, and there's our test script. It's just a table, and behind the scenes is actually an Excel sheet, and it's completely empty right now. So we're going to go in and start recording a test. So to do that, I hit the record button, and I go into my application, and I'm just going to click through it as if I was using it. Log in, and I want to verify my login, so I'll use this verify button to do Control and 1. That's going to verify. So it's important when you're recording any kind of automation, not just to do things, but also to test things, because otherwise you could be clicking through an application, but it may not be displaying what you expect, and that's not validation. That's just process automation. So it's really important to have test points called checkpoints or verification points. So we've logged in. We verified that it's logged us in as the right person. I'm going to create a book. New book 1. Hit insert. I'll verify the insert as well. Hit OK. Log out, so I'm back to my starting point. Hit finish, and that's my automated script. And hit insert, and there it is. And the way it works is it inserts the script. It's a combination of actions, objects on the page, and then potentially parameters that you could then, for example, we've logged in with a librarian as the password. You can then, most tools should allow you to data drive that. So we could take this whole section, make a sub test, and then just pass through different logins and passwords. So that way, if you have to test, 100 logins and passwords, you're not recording 100 tests. You're recording it once, and then you're running this whole set of steps 100 different times with different logins and passwords. And that's the beauty of automation. Your job should be to automate those tests that are really repetitive, that your manual testers are not the most efficient at testing, and reserve their time for the more complex cases where you've got a complex set of situations. If you do this kind of billing profile, prescribing these drugs, the results do these bizarre things together. It's those edge cases that humans are going to be better at finding, and automation will find all the sort of standard cases. So you want to make sure that you're focusing your resources time on the things that they're best at. Computers are good at repetitive stuff, and people are better at more investigative stuff. So definitely use automation to give your testers the time to follow the things that are most complex. So we're going to play this back. I'll hit play. It's going to run through, and again, it's a very simple example. It's just going to play through, log in, and we have some other webinars on our website which go through the automation piece in a lot more detail. So if you are interested in test automation, I would recommend checking out one of the Rapise webinars that we have. We've got some examples testing Dynamics AX, Dynamics 365, Salesforce, Box.com, some other web applications, and there's a lot more interesting webinars, data-driven testing using Excel. So again, if you're interested in automation, we can only scratch the surface today. please feel free to look at one of those other webinars with more information. So that's how you do automation. And then the last thing you can do in Rapise is you can do automated document generation. So to do that, I'm going to create a new test. Let me go here. I'll create it in here. We'll call it new test case. It'll be new manual test. Okay. I'll use the same web application. Firefox. Okay. JavaScript. In this case, you have to use JavaScript. And what you'll do now is you go into this option here called manual steps, and that lets you record a manual test case and then have it automatically go back to SpiraTest. So here's my manual steps. It's empty, and I go to the manual tab, and I now use manual record. And I don't usually want the whole window because it's pretty big. I do want the cursor. That's good. So I hit record manual, and now I'm going to do very similar to what I did before, but I'm going to basically record it manually and make it a manual test case. So let's go in and do that. Librarian, log in, and then I'm going to verify this. So I'll do Control and 1, verify, text, hit OK, and log out, and I'm going to hit finish. So I'm not going to do the whole thing again, just save some time. And when you hit finish, that will then record you a manual test case. And if you go to manual steps, they will appear in here like that. And that's a manual test case. So unlike the automation one, it's not code that you can play back automatically, but it's human readable text. This is what I'm doing. This is what I should see. And then it does include the code version on the side as sample data. So that allows you to automate it later if you want. But that way, this is your manual test case that you can then save back into SpiraTeam. And instead of having to manually type it in, it's built for you. And that's a nice time saver. Thanks for watching today's webinar. I hope it was useful. If you'd like to learn more about software testing and validation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great day.